Hello again, everybody. It's Laurie White from the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to episode number 105 of Chamber TV. We've covered a lot of ground over the course of these last 104 episodes, and today is no different. I want to come to you today with some interesting, insightful information and insights on a topic that a lot of HR professionals are talking about now. And that's the issue of leveraging your company's distinct culture as a way of ensuring that you're attracting the best talent and keeping the best talent. And joining us today to talk about this issue and to tell us all about what it means to have truly a valued company culture is our good friend, Kaydi McQuade. And Kaydi is the co-founder of Back Pocket Resources, and they are a great member of the Greater Providence Chamber. So, hi, Kaydi. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, Laurie. Thanks for having me.
Great. So this is a repeat visit for you. You joined us a couple of months ago, and we talked about LinkedIn and other strategies to connect talent with employers. And today you're back to talk about another important topic, and that's the issue of retention. And particularly during this time when we're all working from home, and it might be a little difficult to sort of, keep your culture, your company's vibe, your company's culture, what it is that makes your place a really special place, keeping that going during this pandemic and work from home sort of environment. So tell us what it means to have a specific culture, Kaydi.
Yeah, so culture is one of those sort of ephemeral and hard to define qualities of work, but it is just so important. And what we see with companies is that the more intentional they are about defining and communicating their culture, the more they can count on the team to be a part of it. So I appreciate you being here today with me. And I hope that you come out of this with some learning. I'm going to be focusing specifically on how culture can be used as a lever to improve the retention, so that we're not losing good people because they're not feeling engaged or connected to their workplace. But that is absolutely not the only effect that a strong culture will have on the workplace. As Laurie said, my name is Kaydi McQuade. I'm the delivery manager of Back Pocket Resources. We're a company that's focused on helping small businesses to build out their capacity to solve what we call the people problems. So the struggles that they have around teams and retention, hiring, all of that good stuff. Feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat. We will be answering questions towards the end of the webcast, and I'm happy to jump in with any concerns or questions that you have. So first of all, let's define culture, right? And what that means. So what are we talking about when we're talking about culture? Right? And I'm not talking about whether or not you can bring your dogs to work or if there's free snacks available for everyone. Those are nice perks, but those are not what the core of the culture is. The culture is defined as the shared values, goals, attitudes, and practices that characterize a company, right? Some of that culture is created by structure that's completely fundamental to the company, right? The vision statements, the mission statements that the founders put in place. And a lot of it is, that your team is going to experience on a day-to-day basis is just going to be those interactions between people, right? Again, that's a lot tougher in the pandemic era where so many people are working from home, or when they are working together in offices, when they're very intentionally maintaining distance from one another, having masks on so you can't necessarily as easily read expressions, and doing a lot more of our meetings in a virtual setting. Every organization has a culture, whether you intend to or not, right? And it's demonstrated by the ways that people talk to each other, the ways that they communicate beyond talking, whether it's text or Slack or internal email. It is there in the policies, in the hierarchies, and the values of the group. Some of the factors that affect that have to do more with your industry or the foundational truth of the company. So if you're in a highly regulated industry, finance or medicine or something like that, where there's a lot more levels of regulation, those organizations tend to be more hierarchical throughout the organization versus like if you're in a startup where it's just a couple of scrappy people in a garage trying to make something happen, that's going to tend to be more fluid and collaborative. But whatever the external situations, the external pressures of your company, taking time to develop and communicate clear expectations for your culture is really critical to being able to have a great rapport with your employees, to getting the right people into your organization, and then keeping them there when they feel a part of something. So a lot of times business leaders sort of think about culture as being that like squishy stuff, the warm fuzzy things on the side, not the meat of the matter. But when good people leave your company, it is a huge disruption, right? We call it voluntary separation. And all the evidence shows that the major reasons why people choose to leave a company are to do with a lack of communication within the organization, a feeling of weak relationships with their colleagues or with their managers, or if there's just not a clear growth trajectory for them personally within the organization. And I mean, everyone, even up to the US Department of Labor, estimates that the cost of that turnover, the cost of the turnover of one employee is between 30% and 150% of their annual salary. So it's not nothing when somebody leaves. And that cost has to do with the hurting morale. It has to do with the costs required to identify and hire and bring in and train a replacement, and just productivity losses from the time that the person is gone. So no one needs the headache of voluntary losses, right? Let's take some time and develop the culture and figure out, what are the ways that we can have the culture that we want and keep it and continue to grow it to prevent that loss, right? So how can you improve the work environment for your existing staff? How can you prevent that voluntary separation? One easy and inexpensive way is to communicate your culture so that people feel like they're part of a team, so that they feel like they are part of the goals and values of the company. And when you define your company cultures, or your company values, that should be communicated all over the place. It should be on your website. It should be in your promotional materials. It should be something that comes up in the course of conversations that you have in training sessions, in annual reviews. It should be something that your clients know about, right? People need to be able to see themselves as part of a team. They need to know what the team is doing, what the team is all about in order to connect with it. So finding the right people for your team isn't just about finding like the specific nuts and bolts skills, right? You need to have the right personality, the right soft skills too. If you're an organization that's really highly analytical and really driven by numbers, getting that person who's all about relationships in there is going to be a culture. It's going to be a misaligned culture. They're not going to fit in, right? Same thing if you are an organization that takes time to celebrate everyone's wins and has a lot of recognition and opportunities for people to get together. That's going to feel a little bit like misaligned for some introverts or for some people who don't appreciate being part of that sort of center of attention moment, right? And none of this is to say that this might not be like wonderful workplaces. The right people in those environments are going to be like, I found my home, right? But when you've got someone who's misaligned, who's not working with the culture that exists, they're not going to feel like they're part of the process. They're not going to feel like they're part of the mission of the organization. So in order to help your staff to understand where the company is headed and who it is as an organization, you need to be able to define it, right? You need to really be able to put your finger on it. Are you a culture of that values taking risks, right? Or are you the opposite and a culture that really requires things to be done in a particular way along a certain process? Are you really driven by a passion for growth, learning, change? Are you really goal driven? Is it the sort of environment where people who are, competitive might really thrive because they're always being able to measure themselves against someone else? Perhaps you've made a commitment to increase the diversity of your leadership team, right? That needs to be communicated, and that needs to be something that everyone feels like they're a part of. When you're trying to define your culture, obviously the values and the mission of the organization, the vision for where you're going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, that all has to play into effect. But it's also a good idea to sort of take the pulse of where you are now, right? Where the organization is today, not just in the perfect future, right? In order to get a really good feeling for what the culture feels like to the staff, the easiest way is just ask them, right? Like, you can do surveys, you can have one-on-one conversations. I always suggest that there's at least some anonymous way that you can poll folks. And the reason for that is that'll help you to get the bad and the ugly, not just the good, right? It's very hard for folks who are mildly unhappy, but not hugely unhappy, to tell you about the things that need to improve. The folks that are hugely unhappy will probably just tell you right out. But when you have an idea for what people are experiencing in their day-to-day life, you can start to build on that, right? And then you look at it and, okay, here's where we are today. Here's where our aspirational goal is. What incremental steps do we need to get through to get from here to there? And that's the fun part, right? Now you get to think about how you're going to reinforce the message, how you're going to get everybody on board. And yes, you can spend some money and have a huge rollout and company-wide picnics and whatever else, but you can also do that in a lot of ways that are not particularly expensive, right? Change the quote in your email signature. Start every meeting, every company meeting that you have, whether you do like a morning stand-up or if you just do weekly, scheduling, whatever the meetings are that you already have in your cadence, just take 2 minutes at the beginning of the meeting to reinforce one of the values and talk about how it is applied in the day-to-day functioning of the organization. All of those ways to communicate it will help your staff to get on board and understand it as something that is not just page 2 of the handbook, but actually something that you are living in an everyday world. Your culture starts being built even before an employee's first day, right? So in our perfect world, we've now defined the culture. We've now started getting the existing employees on board with it. Folks are starting to come along with it. We now want to figure out how you can maintain that, right? And one of the ways to do that is to make sure that you're integrating the messaging about who you are as an organization and where you're going as an organization before someone even applies, right? When somebody new is coming into the organization, you want to make sure that they already know what you're about and are on board with that. You don't want someone coming in who's like, no, not for me, right? This is the way that you communicate. If you communicate it up front, there can be no confusion. There can be no, whoa, I didn't think that was what we were all about, right? So when you're hiring, your job description should include what your company values are, what the culture is all about. You want to make it clear in the interview and in every bit of communication that you have when you're bringing someone new on, who you are as a company, what the leadership style is, what their day-to-day is likely to look like, so that they are on board before they even come on board. And then, your company values and culture needs to be woven into every bit of communication. It should be in your handbook. It should be in your training materials. It should be in your advertising. It should be in your website, right? Every member of your organization, if you are truly emphasizing your culture within your company, every member of your organization should be able to intelligently talk about what the company values are and what the company culture is all about. And if they can't, either they don't believe it, or it hasn't been communicated completely to them. And again, that's, I really do emphasize frequent check-ins with your staff are very important to maintaining this. All of the research shows that that a strong company culture increases productivity to a huge extent. Everyone's pulling in the same direction. It makes attracting good clients and good staff way easier. It makes it way less likely that good people are going to leave. It does so much to benefit your organization, but it isn't just a set it and forget it, right? You need to be very much talking about what the culture is and reinforcing it. So, for example, if you're checking in with your staff, right, and the feedback that you're getting is that something is resonating, it needs to be reinstated or supported in a different way. And catch people being good, right? When somebody is doing something that is aligned with the culture or is aligned with where you are hoping to go as an organization, call them out in the most positive ways, right? Celebrate them as a champion of your company ABC culture on your social media. Put a handwritten note on their desk to encourage them, right? Like there's a lot of inexpensive ways to make the recognition the reward and to encourage it. Similarly, when you have folks that are not living up to it, like that is a conversation that needs to happen in a review cycle, in a one-on-one meeting, right? You need to make sure that there's, if there's someone who's really resistant to some aspect of it, you need to find out why before that person undermines all the good work that you've done on it. Again, I really emphasize having frequent check-ins is just such a great way of doing things. There's all sorts of like free anonymous survey tools online. I use freesuggestionbox.com, but there's tons of them, and I can't say that that's necessarily the best one. Some of them are integrated into the softwares that you may already be using in your organization. You can also just have a shoebox with paper suggestions dropped in it in your office if you're in your office, or location if you're not an office-based organization. But those anonymous surveys, those opportunities for people to tell you what they like and they don't like, those are really valuable. Face-to-face interactions are also really important. Again, in the review cycle, there should be not just opportunities to check in on the culture, but also to check in on the employees, right? Do they feel aligned to what the career path looks like, the career trajectory looks like? Do they see that there is a place for them to continue to grow and learn within the organization? Or are they starting to feel like they've capped out and they're not going to get anywhere? And how can the values be integrated into their roles, and how can the culture be reflected in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis? And listen, I'm not going to tell you that you can get rid of every reason why people would quit, right? There's still going to be, families move or get relocated. People decide to stay home with their kids, or they decide to retire, right? There's reasons why people leave that are just completely outside of our control as leaders. But the things that we can control, right? Making people feel like they're part of the organization, improving communication within the organization, ensuring that people see a place for themselves within the organization, and celebrating the ways that they reflect the values of the organization go a long way towards slowing the flow of people walking out the door, which is, at the end of the day, great for morale. It's great for cost savings. It takes a lot off your plate because you don't have to find and replace new employees as often. So it's just something that's worth doing. So, I want to kick it out with a first question, and I do plan to circle back to the questions in the chat. But just my first question to the folks on the other side of the screen right now is, how are your companies doing that? Drop in the chat the things that you've seen that have been really successful, especially in a virtual environment. What ways are companies identifying and celebrating culture, even if we can't be together in person the way we were a year ago?
Thank you, Kaydi. Want to reinforce that we are live on Facebook, we are live on Twitter, and we are live on YouTube. And we are here for the next 45 minutes or so to talk about this really interesting issue of company culture. And as you put it, Kaydi, it's an ethereal topic, and it's one that I think it takes some practice to really begin to understand and to tap into the intuitive nature of how to really understand what's in the minds of your employees. So really good subject here, good meaty subject for us to talk about, particularly now when we're not all face to face and we're all behind masks. But I know we're going to get some questions, but I wanted to ask, my first question is the notion of company culture may, as a result, just start to yield what some might perceive to be a bunch of buzzwords. We're transparent, we challenge each other, we speak the truth, we're customer oriented. A lot of those words that some skeptics might say, oh yeah, well, everybody has that. How do you put together a package of intentionality, if you will, that doesn't bespeak buzzwords?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. The biggest thing with making it actually actionable and applicable and to infuse those sort of buzzwords throughout the organization is, if you want to say you're accountable, great. Everyone loves accountability. What does that mean? What does that look like? What ways do you demonstrate your accountability? How do you demonstrate accountability to your clients? How do you demonstrate accountability to your team members? How do you demonstrate accountability? What do you do if you do not meet what you have said you are going to? If you promise you're going to deliver something and you don't make it for whatever reason, right? It could be a supplier issue. It could be a shipping delay. Whatever. It could be something that you dropped the ball on. How do you approach that, right? Because just saying you're accountable is just a buzzword, right? Until the rubber actually hits the road and you actually show, okay, these are the ways that I demonstrate accountability. These are the ways that I ensure that not only am I going to do what I say, this is what I'm going to do if I am not able to do what I say. And that tends to make it more actionable and less sort of off in the clouds. Same thing, right? There are companies, when you talk to them, you say, well, what's your culture about? Well, we're all about laughter. We're all about, we want to have a good time together. We want to enjoy our work. That's great. Why? Why are you coming to work to laugh, right? Because we believe we're more productive when we're pulling together as a team, because we believe that laughter is motivational, because we treat each other with respect, because we appreciate each other's unique personalities. Like there's a why in all of these things, right? And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with the sort of like markers of culture, right? If you want to install a foosball table so that your team can blow off steam together, that's great. All for it. As long as it's not a distraction, I'm all on board with it, right? But there has to be a why behind it. We are installing a foosball table not because little men spinning around is so much fun, but because we think it is important for our team to be able to interact at a human level, not just at a workplace level, right? Because we are a driven environment, and therefore we need to have breaks built in order to give people the mental space that they need, right? All of those perks and those nice to haves that are, you know, people talk about as being part of their culture, there's a balcony and a basement for them all too, right? Like, we bring in lunch for our staff a couple times a week. Well, okay, so the balcony of that is that we care about our staff and we want them to have a healthy meal, and we show our appreciation by buying it for them. The basement on that is, we're a really driven environment and we want people to just stay at their desks all day and work and not go take a lunch break, right? Like, so you have to know the why behind things before you can really understand the way that it plays out in the employee experience. And then once you know how it's playing out in the employee experience, what is that communicating to the employees, and how are they communicating that in their interactions with customers, with each other, with their management team, with their direct reports, so that that culture is applied throughout the organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Excuse me, a question that's come up is, you know, you mentioned the idea of, you know, maybe starting out a staff session with, you know, focusing on a word and getting people to talk about it for a few minutes. You know, what does it mean to us to be, you know, an accountable organization, as you just pointed out. So wondering, do employees like talking about this stuff, you know, sort of at the front end of things, or does it make them uncomfortable?
It's typically a muscle that needs to be developed. It's in an organization where there is a strong culture of open communication, and folks feel like they are able to share that out, and they feel like they're talking about something that is safe. It's pretty easy to get folks to talk about, right? If you are an organization that says that you have a value for providing service in the community, and the organization already closes once a month or once a quarter to do a service project, and you raise funds for small kittens, and you have a food drive every year, and people will feel very comfortable talking about the ways in which the company already reflects that commitment to community. If you are an organization where, you know, one of the higher ups tends to be a little sneaky or tends to fudge the numbers or whatever, and you try to have a conversation in an open session about integrity, and people know that, you know, the sales team is fudging the numbers every month, that's going to be a much less comfortable conversation, which is one of the reasons why you want to do some level setting. You want to know what people's lived experiences are within the culture before you start talking, because it's very easy to have integrity listed in your handbook as being a company value. But if the top ranking, you know, I'll pick on sales again, if the top ranking salesperson each year has been doing, you know, getting to that top ranked level by fudging the numbers or by taking shortcuts, and people know it, and that person is still getting sent on the reward trip to Cabo and getting a you know, placard on their desk every year, that's a less comfortable conversation, right? Because you can say you're about integrity all you want, but if you're not living integrity, having people talk about it it can be problematic. More often, it's less cut and dry than that. More often, you know, you say that you are an organization that values innovation, right? Even if people think, I think they pretty much like it if we innovated, right? But they're not feeling pushed to innovate. They're not being given time to innovate. Sorry, those things may be a little bit slower to come out in a public space like a meeting. They might be something that would get mentioned in a one-on-one, or they might be something that would get mentioned in an anonymous survey, where you may find out, like, people understand that the company wants to innovate. People understand that there's a value placed on that. However, there may be a barrier that they're experiencing in their day-to-day career, work, processes that is preventing them from being as innovative as they would like to. So then maybe you have conversations about, you know, freeing up a few hours a week to let people look into new processes or new software, to try new things, right? If you create a forum where people feel safe saying like, hey, we've always done this one process that we do this way, but I've been reading about other companies who have been doing X, Y, and Z that's different, and I'd love to pilot a program where we can try that out and see how that works for our company. If that's supported, if that's given wings, if that's given attention and the space that it needs to try, that will encourage other people to come forward with other suggestions. That will encourage that culture of innovation. If it's, you know, meh, we can't change anything in the supply chain because this is the way that it has to be, and then this is the way we're doing it. Or we just tried a new software last year. We don't want to try adding in a new software right now. It's very disruptive. It takes a lot of time. You can say you're innovative all you want. If you're not allowing for innovation, people aren't going to come to you with innovative ideas. So you have to walk the walk and you know, expound on values that you actually want the company to have, right? You know, if you don't particularly want to be innovative, that's fine. But then don't tell the staff that you're looking to be innovative and make a lot of changes if in fact, culturally, you're very resistant to change.
Kaydi, is this a subject or you know, an inclination that maybe generational driven? Are we seeing more of a mandate to adopt this kind of mindset to attract millennial workers, as an example?
I think that millennial workers might be slightly more inclined, millennial and Gen Z might be slightly more inclined to talk about wanting to be part of a values-driven organization. But I think that all people spend most of their day, you know, full-time workers spend most of their waking hours at work, right? And they want it to be aligned with what they do. Now, that doesn't mean that they expect their role to be as a passion play for them necessarily, right? But they do expect and want to feel a part of something, right? It's the old story of, you know, the bricklayer, right? And you can either have the bricklayer who says, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm putting a brick down, obviously, versus the one who says, well, I'm building a cathedral, right? It's a different mindset. So when you feel like you're part of something, and that can be anything. That can be, you know, a legal office, that can be a service provider, that can be a restaurant, whatever it is, right? If your mission is something that people feel connected to, the people that work for you feel connected to, they'll feel like they are moving towards the end goal, even if all they're doing in that restaurant is washing the dishes, right? They're washing these dishes so that the clients, the customers, can have an amazing dining experience, right? Or so that they can create a once-in-a-lifetime food experience, right? They may only be scrubbing plates, right? They're not actually preparing or serving or talking with the customers at all. But if they believe that they're part of that mission, they will be that much more connected with that workplace.
Interesting points about doing the annual reviews and talking to your employees about what's going on and their reaction to the connectedness that they feel or they may not feel. Is it your experience that employees will in fact tell you the truth?
So again, that's a muscle that has to flex, right? Like if you are seen as a retaliatory manager, if you are someone who is perceived as having punished people for speaking their minds, then no, you're not going to get a whole lot of honesty out of folks, right? If people believe that they are able to talk with you and obviously they don't necessarily going to tell you every single detail about their lives, but if there is a belief that you are asking about things in order to help them move forward in their careers. If you have demonstrated that you're looking to promote from within and you're looking to help your team to grow into their next roles, they're going to be showing you the places where they want to grow. If you've been showing that you will not promote people, and that you're not interested in growth, and that you feel threatened when somebody is moving up in the organization because you're protecting your turf, no. And so all of this points back to needing to have a very strong understanding of what people's lived experiences are within the organization. Particularly if you have a ton of turnover, particularly if people have left, right? I always suggest if you can get people to agree to it, do an exit interview, or have somebody else do an exit interview, right? Once somebody's leaving, they have way less interest in sugarcoating the truth for you, right? And they may tell you, I left because every time I took a new course towards my degree, Kaydi acted as though I was trying to steal her job and take food away from her children. Okay, that's something worth knowing. I'm not going to get the kind of honest feedback that I'm hoping for if I'm, sort of protecting my turf all the time. If instead, the team is seeing that, I do value a culture where people grow and move into new roles. And sometimes that does mean moving on from my organization, especially as a small business. I may not have the space for somebody to grow into if they, go out and get an advanced degree or learn some new skills or something like that. But that's okay, right? The goal is not to keep employees forever against their will, no matter what they want in the world, right? The goal is to, while they're with the company, harness their skills, their talents, their knowledge, right? So if I have somebody who's motivated enough to be putting themselves back in school or through a program to gain additional knowledge, certification, whatever, that's somebody who really cares. That's somebody who can, while he or she is with my organization, can be helping drive the growth here, right? So that doesn't need to be a threat to me, but only if I can manage to make it not a threat to me. So there's always some give and take. That's why, I think that there should be some one-on-one face-to-face conversations that are more formal. There should be some sort of, we call them like temperature checks, right? Where you're just informally, saying, hey, what's going on? How are things for you? How's that new initiative that you're working on with XYZ company? Is everything happening well? Do you have what you need to be successful with that project? And then also having those anonymous surveys or the ability for people to reach out and let you know what they're thinking without any fear of retribution or any fear that their name is associated with that squeaky wheel or anything, because that, having all those different channels of communication will let people get the truth to you sooner or later.
All right. Well, you've done an amazing job of laying down the foundation and the rationale for this and the degree to which, it's so important today. So let's sort of, start from the beginning. And, if our listeners are thinking, yeah, this is good, I need to do this, but I don't know where to begin. So can you break it down in like really easy baby steps to do like, 1, 2, and 3 to get people sort of, in the mindset and on a path to be able to figure this out for themselves?
Absolutely. If your company has stated values and mission and vision, go back and look at those documents, look at the wording, see if it's reflective of where you are now and what your business model is now. Sometimes if you wrote them, if you last looked at them several years ago, or even honestly at this point, 18 months ago, like things could have changed, right? So make sure that they're still reflective of that long-term goal, where you would like to be. Then I would say talk to your existing team. Again, some in person, some anonymously, and understand what their day-to-day experience of it is. A great way to just check in is just hand everyone an index card the next time you're in a meeting and say, hey, can you write down our top 3 values as a company? Or can you write down our culture in one word as a company? What you get back will be what they think it is, whether it's what you think it is, right? And so you want to try to start figuring out how to align that. Once you have your vision and your values and your culture organized into your thoughts, you need to create the rationale for how you live that, how the company lives that, right? So again, if it's accountability, if it's integrity, if it's innovation, if it's a culture of learning, if it's a culture of service, what are you doing within the specifics of your day-to-day business operations, because you are still running a business, in order to demonstrate those values and in order to make sure that those values are infused in the business that you do. And then it's communicate, communicate, communicate. You just need to make sure that you are reinforcing it every step of the way with your employees, with your any of your promotional materials, with your clients. You want to make sure that everybody knows that you are a culture that values, responsiveness, right? And this is how you're going to demonstrate responsiveness. And when you don't demonstrate responsiveness, this is what you're going to do to correct that. And then, then it starts to get more into the are people rising to the occasion? If they are, that's great. You reward them and you make it public, right? You call them out on your social media and you say here's our champion of responsiveness. Kaydi did a great job today in handling this client bit of client feedback or this problem that came up and got right on it and took care of it and followed up. We love her. She's great, right? Free, public, and makes people feel good. You can also start to have conversations with people that are not living up to that, right? Hey, Kaydi, I noticed that, I got a complaint from a client that they emailed you 3 days ago with a request and you haven't responded yet. That's unacceptable. We have a culture of responsiveness. So let's come up with an improvement plan, right? I expect that any client requests, sent in by email are responded to within 24 hours, business hours, however you want to phrase it, right? Whatever the response time is that's reasonable for your organization. It could be 2 hours, it could be 15 minutes. Whatever works for you, but that is how we are going to demonstrate responsiveness, right? And then you hold them to it. You have a follow-up meeting and you say, what, Kaydi, I've noticed that your response times have come down from 3 to 4 days down to, 24 hours. That's great. Can we get it down to 18 hours? Can we get it down to 12 hours so that our clients feel like we are really demonstrating responsiveness? And then celebrate that as that happens. Conversely, if it's not happening, Kaydi doesn't believe in responsiveness, right? So where's that barrier? And it could just be a structural thing, right? She could have 97 emails coming in an hour, at which point there's no way she can be responsive to all of them. So then how do you delegate? How do you solve it? How do you create the supports in order to be able to be successful? But if it's just a question of the person not getting on board, then what is the progressive improvement plan? And then it's a question of maintaining it, right? Your company culture isn't going to be just one thing, right? So maybe you make a monthly focus, right? Our monthly focus this month is accountability. So at every meeting that we have this month, we're going to talk about accountability. We're going to talk about ways that we've demonstrated accountability. We're going to talk about ways that we didn't demonstrate accountability so that we know how to be more accountable in the future, right? In February, we are going to talk about responsibility. It's kind of the same. Never mind. We're going to talk about innovation, right? And how can we be innovative? How can we demonstrate innovation or an innovative mindset? Who has demonstrated a great innovative idea and how are we implementing it? Where have we not been innovative? Where have we not looked at our process to see where we can innovate? March will be something different, right? So it's about creating those norms, about reinforcing those norms, both positively and negatively, and then reviewing them, because as your organization grows and changes, you'll have new people, you'll have new situations, you might have different clients, you might have a different scale that you're operating with, right? Best news ever, right? You've grown from 5 people to 500. Your culture is going to change, but you need to make sure that everyone there is still reflecting the values, even if they're doing it in a different way.
You've ticked off a number of values that companies might want to embrace, for instance, responsiveness and innovation and a culture of learning, etc. So not to put you on the spot, but could you like maybe tick off the top 10 of your favorite values that you've seen companies implement successfully and they've done it well, that might be appealing to help those that are listening today figure out how to, how to really get started with, reaching for a value that, that quite frankly is interesting and challenging.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it's a very hard one to answer because we don't work with just one industry. So where a culture of consistency might be the pinnacle for one industry or one organization, right? They want the experience their customers have to be consistent, whether I'm helping them or whether you're helping them or someone down the hall is helping them. They want that absolute consistency. Another organization might embrace innovation, right? And so that is, or responsiveness or flexibility, right? Depending on what sort of service or good they're providing. Some great ones though that I think are really important, and I would love to see people or companies really embrace. I think integrity is just so critically important to everything that anyone does, right? If you're not doing it with an absolute fidelity to your word, what are you doing?
Do you really need to point that out though? That seems obvious to me.
I wish it was obvious. So I think that most companies will tell you that they operate with integrity, and then I think that there are a lot of places where they don't necessarily, right? And a lot of it is felt internally, right? Where they say that they have a policy of honesty, integrity, but then they treat certain groups of employees differently than they treat other groups of employees, right? Whether that's to do with their status within the organization, gender, diversity issues, anything else, right? It's when you have a culture that the second they get off the phone with their client, they're like, oh, this idiot, right? They're not behaving with integrity, right? The client may not know directly that they're being called an idiot the second they're off the phone, but you got to know that they're going to feel it at some level in the way that they're interacting. So yes, I think that most companies do operate with integrity in most of their interactions, but I do think that integrity and honesty, I think those are things that have to be 100% all the time.
All right. Well, I interrupted you during.
No worries.
So your point was that in different industries, it may evoke different values. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
you were, quality control, consistency would be an important value, but just in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's very important for companies to really understand their place in culture. So a lot of companies have decided to have initiatives around community service to make their organizations, so they'll do food drives, they'll do work with nonprofits, things like that. I think that's valuable, and I think that it gives it can be that certain something that customers look for when they're looking for the companies that they want to work with. I think that it's important for companies to operate with. I've lost my train of thought a little bit. Sorry.
We were talking about the different, we talked about some of the basic values of what a company can adopt. So
Mm-hmm.
some of the favorites that you put out there were a culture of learning, where a company, or if we have a culture that's flexible, we have a culture that is responsive and timely. We have a culture that values, service. We have a culture that values continuous improvement as examples. So you did a really great job, Kaydi, talking about how to think of the why and not just, do it from a buzzword perspective, but, think, 2 or 3 or 4, of your favorites that you think, resonate well with the employees and that
Absolutely.
still, are easy to manage and get started with.
Okay. So I think excellence is one, right? And again, that sounds so obvious, right? Like, of course, every company wants to be excellent, but how do you demonstrate that within your industry, within the service that you provide, within the good that you sell, within the interaction that you have with your clients, right? I think that a willingness to just work hard, right? Roll up your sleeves, get in the trend, fix problems when they arise can be very game changing for organizations, right? There's weak organizations will often find where people will pass the buck. They'll kick the can to somebody else. They'll say, "Oh, I gotta check with my boss on that," right? So having that ability to make decisions and then act on them is a really powerful culture to develop within your organization, right? And obviously, you need to provide training. You need to provide some safeguards so that people aren't just saying, well, yeah, I can totally do that and do it, volunteer the company to do something completely outside of what they do. But that's important. I think creativity goes hand in hand with that, right? How do you demonstrate the creative thinking that your company brings to the table? And you can be creative and still be a company that delivers dumpsters. You can be creative in your approach and still be a company that makes cardboard boxes, right? It doesn't mean that you are, necessarily like an arts provider or a theater group or something like that. Creativity can be suffused throughout, and that ties into the innovation, that ties into the outside the box thinking. There is also a good place for tradition and experiences, on the other hand, right? So how do we document what we've done as an organization so that we're not making the same mistakes twice? How do we train on what has worked in the past in order to not make everyone have to reinvent the wheel, but rather to grow from where we have started so that we're getting into new places? And that ties in also with that continuous improvement and culture of learning.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, those are really great suggestions. You've ticked through a lot of them, and I know that has given folks a lot to think about in order to begin to set themselves out on this journey of really crystallizing what they want to put forth as a value. And I'm sure it would be important not to pick all of them, right? Pick
Yeah.
one or two that really stand out, that really speak to you and to your organization. Because if you have a million values, then you don't have any, essentially. It's like,
Yeah.
if you have a million priorities, you don't have any priorities. So if I'm understanding you correctly, Kaydi, you're saying, pick a couple that are exciting, that would be exciting to your team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially when you're starting out, if you have not spent the time to define your culture, if your company just kind of drifted to where it is now, and you're trying to like codify this stuff for the first time, try to pick things that you already are doing to some extent and then just up level them, right? So if you have been innovative, right, how do you innovate throughout the organization, not just maybe with your product or service or your customer interactions, but how do you innovate in terms of the way you schedule? How do you innovate in ways to bring down your supply costs? How do there's all sorts of other ways to innovate that you can build on if you've already got innovation in your company DNA, right? And that just takes it to that next level.
Fantastic. So we have only a couple of minutes left, and I just want to recap in this way, and that is to ask you very simply, who owns this as an activity? And people might be saying, well, that sounds like a lot of work. I don't know how I could do that. I don't know how. It sounds like something that you need to be on every day, following up and understanding and listening and reacting, and I don't have time for that. I just I've got all these deadlines and etc. What is your simple advice to an organization that might be asking, okay, we don't have 17 people in our HR department to be on top of this. How do you implement it with the small staff?
Yeah, and that is a really good point, and I thank you for bringing it up. It is actually something that every member of the organization needs to bring with them, right? The initiatives can be kicked off by the leadership or started, but until it's really infused its way into every step of the organization, if every person is not working towards excellence in his or her own area, the organization is not going to be excellent, right? Or is not going to have a culture of excellence. If every person isn't looking for opportunities to grow and learn, you're not going to have a culture of continuous improvement, right? Because 3 people are off getting MBAs on the weekends. Like that's not a culture of learning, right? People need to be reading things and listening to podcasts. It doesn't matter like what you don't necessarily have to be that person that's going out to get the MBA, but you need to be looking at, best practices in your part of the field, in your area of expertise, and growing that area of expertise, learning more about that in order to have a culture of learning and improvement throughout the organization. So while these initiatives can be sort of kicked off and nurtured by the leadership, and that looks different depending on how, the size of the organization and sort of where the lines of accountability and who's reporting to who and how that all happens. But if it's just a top down, like, yes, we are a culture of excellence, and everyone's like, great, we're excellent. Okay, 501, I'm punching out, that's not necessarily going to be reflective of the company.
Sure.
So it really has to be something that people believe in and that people feel like they are a part of. And nobody has stayed in a company because they feel like the handbook lists 5 goals that they really like, right? People will stay at a company where they feel like they are part of those goals and that they resonate with those goals.
Yeah. And you also talked about, maybe even just starting with the gathering of the feedback in the freesuggestionbox.com as a tool to maybe get you started, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any other tools? You said there's a lot of them out there for gathering feedback anonymously. Can you suggest a couple of others in case freesuggestionbox.com doesn't?
Yeah, and the plain old fashioned shoebox in the front office, right?
No front office, so I guess it all has to go online, right?
I know, right? Well, I mean, a lot of companies are in person, right? Retail, restaurants, manufacturing, they never really shut down like the offices did. A lot of offices did. And culture should be suffused throughout all organizations, not just office workers. Yeah, some of the software tools that you're already using, I know HubSpot has some, Salesforce has some, Google Forms has the ability to collect anonymous data. So there's all sorts of places where you can gather, or there's all sorts of technology platforms where you can gather survey information. There's also tools like SurveyMonkey and things like that that will let you do quick responses. I suggest freesuggestionbox.com just because it doesn't require downloading an app. So if there's people in your organization who are not connected to, the CRM or whatever, or they're not particularly technologically advanced, it's literally like a super plain, like, answer this question. Here are your questions, without downloading anything or having to install apps or anything like that.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. So you have really, you've really taken us through the entire journey from start to finish. You've explained why it's important and how people can begin to think about it, how they can embed it in their corporate culture and make sure that it just, as you say, is suffused throughout the organization, and that people, are encouraged to, tell their truth and to lay it out there and not be afraid of consequences. And it probably all starts in the hiring process too, right? To make sure that you're onboarding the right kind of people who understand the culture, who fit into the culture, and respect the culture that you are trying to put forth. So we thank you so much, Kaydi McQuade, Back Pocket Resources. You are the co-founder, and tell folks how they might get in touch with you, Kaydi, if they want to learn some.
Absolutely. So we will, in the link that gets sent out in this, you'll see all my contact information with my phone number. There's my email address. If you want, hello@bpresources.com comes into the whole team. So if I'm not there to get it right away, you can get that too. But there's my phone number. I'd love to talk with folks. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm all over the social media. So, but please do be in touch. We do offer a 1-hour discovery call at no charge and no obligation to business leaders who are, just wanting to chat about what's going on in their companies. We'll offer a response and with next steps, if you choose to engage with us, you can make that decision at that point, but there is no obligation in that initial call. So I'd love to just jump on and get to know, your company and what's challenging you. What are the people problems that are keeping you up at night?
Excellent. This has been fantastic, Kaydi. And I want to point out that Kaydi is spelled Kaydi. So
that's really why we have the hello.
So if you're listening to this and you're not watching it and you cannot see that it's Kaydi, Kaydi, I just want to throw that out there. So Kaydi McQuade, Back Pocket Resources, great member of the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce. This is your second visit with us. Great subjects, and we look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you so much for having me.